Hey everyone, welcome to class. Today we are going to take a look at the intro of how Blackboard's organized, how you're going to be able to find anything for the course. We're going to take a look at lessons 1 and 2 of Illustrator, and what I'm going to do is walk you through all the steps. So what some people like to do is just kind of set these things up like side by side on a screen so that you can kind of watch this, play it and pause it and kind of walk through the lessons with me. Or if you want to set it up on like a separate device next to your computer, whatever works for you. But the first thing I want to take a look at is jumping into Blackboard. So obviously at this point you should have found Blackboard. When you first get into the site, you're going to see this start here. This is just kind of a quick intro. Everything is going to be done via the YouTube channel, and at this point you should have read through the syllabus and kind of gotten a feel for all of that as far as what's going to be due and when it's going to be due. Everything is all set up for you to use in Blackboard under the weekly assignments. So all your lessons, all your start files, all of that is all going to be covered right in there. Remember, this is an online course, so everything will be available to you just through Blackboard here. So after this week, you're not going to be seeing this welcome to class announcement. This has got kind of a link to buying the book, downloading the Adobe Creative Cloud installer, all that kind of stuff. What you'll see after this week is straight to this announcements page, and this is going to show you by date what is recommended that you do and when you turn it in, and then there'll be links to the YouTube channel for all the different demos over the course of the semester. If you need to contact me, all my faculty information is here. Office hours will be posted in there as well, so you can take a look at all that. Weekly assignments is really going to be the big thing that you're going to be checking out here, and that's going to be where all the lessons are housed, all the support files, everything that you'll need. You'll see that when you buy your copy of the book that there are support files that come along with it. If you want to download those right to your computer, you can. There's instructions at the start of the book. Otherwise, I'll have all of them posted right in here for you. We're going to take a look at this week, our lessons 1 and 2. So it's getting to know the work area, kind of getting to understand a little bit of what Illustrator is, how you can open files, manage them, manage the workspace, that type of thing. And then the other lesson we'll take a look at is part 2, which is selecting artwork. And again, it's real straightforward. We're going to kind of build slowly from week to week or from lesson to lesson. So as you go through this, keep in mind that, we're not going to tackle all this at once. There's so many tools or so many techniques that we're going to kind of take them one little piece at a time. And then at the end of every lesson, we're going to do a little extension project where it'll give you a chance to either create something on your own with the skills you just acquired or kind of work on refining those down a little bit. So for lessons 1 and 2, if you want to click on that, it'll take you into getting to know the work area. There's a couple of different videos that I'll have posted. These are just kind of support videos. So if you happen to get stuck on one thing or another, that's there for you. So there is a little video I have on the Illustrator interface. So if you want to take a look at that, it's just kind of some basic walkthrough stuff there. There is another video, it's called Drop in Logo Design. This is a really great intro to Illustrator to see from like a very successful graphic designer and kind of how he puts all of his different Illustrator skills to work. And then the lesson 1 and 2 start files are going to be right here. So if you click on that, what that should do is just download automatically to your computer. And let me grab that. And you'll see here's my lessons 1 and 2. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag them right off onto my desktop. Everything will be in compressed zip files. Some of you, depending on the browser you're working with, it may automatically decompress them right away into a folder. Some of you may need to drag it out and just double click it. Obviously, I'm working on a Mac, so all files will be zipped and then just unzipped into a folder. And then all of our files for this week's lesson are going to be right here. So there's 2 files for lesson 1, and then there's 1 file for lesson 2. And again, as we're going to be working through these things, you'll pull the file open, and then I'll kind of walk you step by step. So again, if you want to play and pause this video as you're going through, that works just fine. So what I'd like to take a look at is, now that we have this open, where you can find Illustrator. I created a shortcut on my dock right here. It's kind of like brown and yellow AI. If you have the Adobe Creative Cloud installer, you want to make sure that you're always running updates on it. I have mine set up here so that it pops open. And as I go through, and mine might look a little different than yours based on how mine is managed, but what it'll do is this is automatically set so that as new updates become available, they just automatically install and update in the background. So generally, I like to kind of make sure that I'm staying up to date with the newest version of Illustrator because this is cloud-based. They're always pushing out updates, just kind of like you'd see on an app. So I'll close this out here. Now that I've got kind of the idea of where all my stuff is, in here, you're seeing that here's our start files for lesson 1 and 2. There's also an extension project. We'll talk about that once we get done with the lessons for today. And then there's a couple of support videos, and I'll always include extras. So if you get stuck on one particular step, like grouping or arranging or aligning, there's always kind of some additional support videos that kind of help explain that in depth. So I'll leave those on there as well for you. Those are optional. That's really just more if you feel like you're stuck on a particular process as I go through the demo, that you have some kind of backup content to work off of. So now that we've got that all taken care of, what I want to do is jump into Illustrator, and here it is. And once you have Illustrator open, the first time you open it, you're going to kind of see this little what's new. They do a little walkthrough of different features, different tools, different updates that they've included. I'm just going to close this out. And there's a couple different ways that you're going to be able to open up files. And what it actually will do is it'll remember the recent documents that you've had open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump right back in here. And here with my lesson 1 and 2, there's a couple different ways I can do this. I can grab these files and I can just drag them down to the icon. I can drag them over into the application window. And that's what lesson 1 looks like. And lesson 2 is this one right here. So I'll make sure I got the right stuff. I'm just drag them over in here. And it's going to pop them open. And if you take a look, because I opened 2 documents at once, Illustrator does something where it actually pulls open these documents in separate little tabs up here. So you can kind of navigate these 2 tabs. I'm going to start on lesson 1, start1.ai. And for this, really what we're going to take a look at first is kind of how the interface, how everything is all organized. So what I like to do is I like to kind of get a sense of how Illustrator works, how the different kind of pieces of it are set. So if you take a look up top, yours might look different than mine right now. I've run Illustrator a few times, but there's a couple different ways that you can set up your workspace. So what I want to do is I want to start with that. So if you hover up on the top right corner of your screen here, it says switch workspace. There's all these different setups. So you might be seeing something that looks more like this. This is just Essentials. There's Essentials Classic. I prefer Classic because then I get to see this little bar along the top that gives me an idea of kind of editing objects as I have them selected. So if you ever see or ever open Illustrator, maybe you're on a different computer, maybe you're on a lab on campus, if it doesn't look right when you open it, remember, you can always reset your workspace. The default I'll be using for all the lessons is Essentials Classic. So if you want to make sure that you're kind of staying with me on that, that'll make the most sense so that what you're seeing is kind of the same as what I'm seeing. Now, within your work area, there's a couple different things. Up top, this is your application bar. So really what happens is if I select an object, this shows me all the properties for an object right up at the top. So there's all the different ways I can work with it. I just think that this is the easiest way of doing it because then I don't have to constantly pull open different tabs along the side to get access to that. Second thing over here is the panels. So these panels are all the different ways that you can apply different things to objects. So if I was going to change color, or pull open guides, swatches, all the different properties for an object. I have all sorts of text options I can work with. Here I've got this pathfinding and aligning and transforming. You don't need to worry about what all this stuff is right now. Just know that it exists over there. You can also take a look if you go over from your window menu. Here under window, it says 3D materials, actions, align. That's all of these panels over here. So if you ever can't find something, remember all those panels on the right-hand side are all available to you in that window. Now, one thing you might notice is that like these are kind of tiny little icons. If you click over this little expand button, these 2 little triangles right there, this will show you kind of a bigger view of all this, and then it pulls everything out in tabs. So if you like working that way as well, if you want to see all this stuff up at once, this is going to depend on how big your screen is. Like I'm working on a second display, I've got a nice big monitor, so it's not that bad for me. But if you're working on like a tiny little laptop, you may not want to eat your whole screen with that, so you can kind of control how expanded that is. Same thing works over here on this toolbar. Toolbar works the same way. Now, there's lots and lots of tools, and because it's the first time you've opened Illustrator, as you hover over things, it'll show you what the tool is, and it'll give you a little demo of what it does, and then kind of just talk you through what that process looks like. Now, yours may look like this. You may have one long one, and you may prefer it that way, or you can click up here and expand it out. Now, because there are so many tools in Illustrator, they don't show you all of them at once. What they do is they dock them into other tools. So if you see these little triangles, that means that you can press and hold, and it's going to show you additional tools in that area. So here with my selection tool, I've got multiples that I can work with. I've got the direct select and I've got this group select. Same thing down here with like my type tool. I've got all these different ways of working with this. If you were to take every one of these tools and give them their own dedicated box, what you'd end up with is something that's got way too much space on your screen, and it eats almost 3/4 of it. So rather than having your screen be entirely connected with or entirely in icons, this is all just going to be hidden here so that I can click and drag and get access to all these. We're going to go over probably about 75% of these tools over the course of the next few sessions. I'm just going to walk you through them one at a time, so there's no need to worry about anything or what it does right now. This is really just more about getting familiar with the workspace and how it's organized and what's in there. Down at the bottom, you got the status bar. So this shows you how far you're zoomed in, so you can control your zoom levels. Here, if you want to rotate your screen, you can control that. There's also a way to control your artboards. So if I come over to this other document here, and again, I can switch between active documents from these tabs. Notice here, I've got two different setups. The cool thing about Illustrator is you can actually navigate multiple pieces or multiple pages in a single document. They're called artboards, and we'll have a whole lesson on them. So here, if I wanted to make sure I'm active and editing on this document, I see I've got this artboard selection, so the yum with the bowls or the yum text. So what that does is it lets me pull over and full screens it right away for me. So when I select it, it shows that 2 is selected and active, and that's the one I'm actually editing on. So again, we'll get in more detail with these, and we're not going to really need to worry about artboards too much, but we will come back to that and do a whole lesson on kind of organizing and setting up documents and how you can kind of customize all that stuff. Super helpful. And when you save a document as a PDF, it'll actually take all of these pages and we'll put them all in one big area for you. Now, that's an idea of the workspace, but what I want to take a look at is, now that we have the workspace kind of figured out, what I want to take a look at is how we can zoom things in and out. Like, we're super zoomed in, and we basically like lost our whole document. So what we can do is we can play around with a couple different ways of zooming in and zooming out. First, if you go to your view menu, there's all sorts of zoom in, zoom out commands here. We could fit it all in the window. We could just fit the artboard in the window. So we can do this all from this view menu. If I wanted to see it at like actual size, it zooms way in. I've also got this control here. So maybe you like this better. You know what percentage you're at. You can zoom way in, or you can zoom way out. The other way to do this is with the zoom tool. The zoom tool is really just a click and drag. So if I click and drag to the right, it zooms in. If I click and drag to the left, it zooms out. Now, once I'm really zoomed in, the problem is I can't move it around the document. It's just making me zoom in and out. So if I grab this hand tool next to it, now I can click and drag and kind of navigate around a zoomed in document. So maybe I wanted to go all the way to the bottom of my text. I can click and drag this way to see where that's all organized. Now that we've taken a look at kind of the view stuff, the zooming in, zooming out, where things are organized, what I want to take a look at is what Illustrator actually is. So there's two different types of artwork. There's raster art, that's the Photoshop style art, that's stuff that's pixelated. So think like if you've ever been to a website and the resolution on an image looks kind of choppy or kind of grainy, or you can see edges. Notice that when I got super zoomed in here, like maybe I'll go to 600%, and let me zoom in this way. As I zoom in, I don't see all that pixelation. I'm at 55,000% here, and there's no pixelation. It's just a nice clean line. The reason why is that Illustrator isn't built up of a block of pixels. What it is just a series of points that all connect to each other. So if I select an object, and that's text, here this is an image, they all work the same way. I've just got points, and all Illustrator is doing is connecting those points together. So here, all my different points, they can scale up as big as you want or as small as you want, and you never lose image quality. And that's the benefit of working with Illustrator and working with illustration. This is stuff that you'll see like on billboards, on large scale stuff. That's the type of art you're going to end up creating with it, because there's just so much you can do with it. So now that we've got all this text, let's take a look at that text. I'm going to click on this. Text is going to act the exact same way. I can scale up or down, and I don't lose quality. And if I just click right in here, say I wanted to add an extra M, I can drop those in there. I can get rid of them. And again, it's just like a simple editor. So we're seeing that there's art-based tools and that there's text-based tools that we'll be able to work with over the course of these documents. Now, there's no real editing we did to this thing, but what I am going to ask that you do is just to kind of show me that you've opened the document, you've been able to kind of zoom in, play around with it. When you're done with any project or any lesson for this class, what I'd like you to do is do a File, Save As command. Make sure you include your last name, and then just a quick description of whatever it is, and save it as an Adobe PDF. And I'm just going to save mine right onto my desktop. I like putting it all there because it's just kind of easier when I send it all over. And what you're going to be doing is when you're done with lessons, you'll save them as PDFs and email them over to me. The beauty of PDFs is that you could take a PDF, reopen it in Illustrator. It's not even the .ai file. It could be a .pdf. and PDF retain all that Illustrator editing capability. So now that this thing's saved as a PDF, I'm going to close these two out, and I don't need to save this. But what I want to do is I want to take a look at my desktop for that lesson one. And here it's a PDF. If I double click it, it opens in a PDF viewer. In my case, the preview app on a Mac. See, my resolution looks really good, nice big document. And the file's pretty small too, 6.3 meg. I could email this, but take a look. If I drag this thing back into Illustrator, all my editing capabilities are all there. As I hover over things, as I make edits, I can jump back into this PDF and re-edit this thing if I need to. So the nice part about saving as PDFs is if you happen to accidentally delete something, you're not going to run into any problems with losing your file, because if you have the PDF, you'll have a document that you can go back in and edit. So that's it for lesson one. It's really just a matter of opening up, kind of getting a little bit more familiar with the workspace, kind of how I have everything organized. So again, when you're done, save that thing off as a PDF and email it to me, just to show me that you're understanding how to open files, how to navigate them, and how to save as PDF. The second lesson that we're going to take a look at right away is going to let us do a little bit more kind of fun stuff. We're going to actually be able to kind of click on things and edit things and change things. So if you take a look inside that lesson 2 folder, there's this lesson 2 start.ai. I'm going to drag this thing over into Illustrator, pop it open. I want to make sure I full screen here so you guys can get the full advantage of the window. And again, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so I can kind of fill my screen a little bit more. Now, just like we talked about before, I've got two different artboards here. I've got this artboard on the left, which is really my production artboard. This is the thing that's going to be the final piece. And then my artboard on the right are just objects that I'm going to use to kind of edit and then bring over here to kind of fine tune the art. So first thing we're going to take a look at in this lesson are the selection tools. These are these two tools up at the top. You're going to notice that there's two selection tools. There's the regular selection tool, which will grab an entire object just like it says. Then there's the direct select tool. The direct selection tool is going to let you edit individual anchor points so that you can kind of modify things as art more so than just moving them around. So let's start with the regular selection tool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this, and we're going to use these as the pupils for this panda bear's eyes, but the problem is that they're probably a little bit too big right now. Now notice when you select an object with your selection tool, it brings open this kind of box around the edge. This is called the bounding box, and there's a couple different things that we're going to be able to do with this. First off, if you click in the middle, you can move it around, and notice I have these smart guides. It's always trying to snap and align with these little magenta lines to keep things even or spaced out. So that's the ability to move. Then there's also this ability to scale. So if I click and drag, I can make things bigger or smaller. And if I hold my shift key, it'll force it to stay in perspective. So here I'm not going to have it stretched out in any weird way, because again, I'm selecting it and I'm clicking on these handles and I'm holding my shift key to lock that perspective. Now you can select multiple objects and make multiple edits at once. So let me undo my little changes I made here. If I grab the selection tool, I can actually click and drag across multiple areas and it'll select multiple objects. So now if I wanted to shift two things and make them exactly the same size together, I can do that. I can also move them. So I can see that that's probably gonna be still a little bit too big. So I can shift click and I'm just holding down my mouse button. If I let go, it's gonna lock in place. I can click back on it and move it. So as long as I see this blue highlight around the object, that means I have my object selected and then I can scale it and move it and do kind of whatever I want with it. So these look pretty good. Now what I want to do is I want to take these things and I want to place these over on this panda and actually drop these in place. So because the eyes aren't exactly centered, I'm going to grab them one at a time. I'm going to drag them over here. There's one. And there's two. Now you might notice that we kind of have a little bit of a problem here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There was that little white kind of circle. It almost acted like a kind of like a little light glare across the eyelid. It kind of added a little bit more like realism to the illustration, but it got lost. The reason it got lost is because I ran into a stacking issue. When you're looking at art in Illustrator, everything is stacked one piece on top of another. And if I go up into my view menu, there's this option called outline. So if I click on outline, what it does is it shows me this is all the actual art that's stacked in there. So you see how I've got these little circles right here? Well, I covered those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with my object arrangement. I can send things forwards and backwards within the document. so that they either pop all the way to the front or kind of hide or tuck back behind other pieces. So I'm going to grab this one. And what I can do is I can actually right click on it. I can do an arrange and I can bring it to front. So now let's go back onto my view. I'll go back into my preview mode and there it is. So now my stacking order is correct. So again, one more time, all I'm doing is I'm going into my view and then into outline, and I'm just seeing the outlines of all the edges of all the art. And then I'm going to grab on this one because I know I need to bring this one to the front. I can also get at this from my object menu, arrange, and bring it all the way to the front. Notice my options are bring it all the way to the front, bring it forward or backwards one step at a time, or send it all the way to the back. Obviously, because I want this to be in front of that black dot, I'll bring it all the way to the front, go back into my preview mode, click away to deselect, and now this thing is looking right. So that's the first thing as far as moving. It's really just kind of with that regular selection tool. Obviously, like we didn't do anything super creative with it, but it's a really powerful piece that's going to allow us to arrange, stack, and kind of piece together our art. Now, what I'm going to do is kind of scroll over up onto my production artboard or my work artboard here and take a look at this object. It looks like I've got a bunch of custom pieces that are all kind of stacked together into one object. And what I want to do is I want to play around with these pieces and kind of just adjust them a little bit. The way I'm going to do that is instead of working with them as one big chunk, I want to adjust those individual anchor points. So I'm going to come back over here to my direct selection tool, and I'm going to click on any one of these. And notice as you click on them, you're going to see all these little anchor points. You're going to see these circles. Let's take a look at what these all do. Now, before I do that, I'm going to zoom way in on this so we can really see it. So now that I'm zoomed in, see I've got these points. Now, when I select an object, they're all darkened, all those little points. That means the whole object is selected. So whenever you're editing individual pieces, you're going to start by selecting the whole object. Then if you click on the second time, all the other ones, they all went hollow, and only this one is selected. So now if I wanted to take this and pull this out, I can adjust this thing. If I want to bring it up or down, I'm controlling just that one anchor point on the art. You'll also notice that there's these little handlebars. For every part of Illustrator art, there's two pieces. There's an anchor point and then a handlebar that controls kind of the curve or the radius of that point. So say I wanted to click on this one. Now what I'm doing is I'm just kind of grabbing these one point at a time and making adjustments and kind of customizing it. Here you'll notice like on this one, it looks like this is kind of like a hard path, a hard edge on that path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this thing. And if I grab this circle, it actually adds a curvature to it. I want to put a little more of a curve on that thing. It's a little bit more smooth, a little bit more natural looking. Same thing on this one. I'm going to curve this out a little bit. So that's the other way you can work with it. So there's really two parts of Illustrator objects. There's anchor points with these handlebars, and these are kind of curves that we can control. Or there's these straight points where there's no handlebars, and these are just individual straight lines. So you notice that's a straight line coming off in either direction. Now, if you wanted to, you can go in and kind of mess around with all these. I just wanted to smooth this one out, and maybe I can take a look at how this one's built. Looks like I had a handlebar there. Smooth that, or maybe bring it back a little bit and kind of finesse that line a little, just so I get a little bit more smoothness to it. So when I'm done with the object, because this is going to act as one big piece, what I want to do is I want to group this all together. So whenever I'm done working with an object, I always click away to deselect it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my regular selection tool, and I'm going to try and grab this whole object. So just like we did before with the eyes, I'm going to click and drag over the top of this whole thing and select all these. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pieces. I want this to act like one piece. Right now, because this is a big object, if I try to grab these, it's only going to move one leaf. That's not super efficient. I don't want to do that. I want this thing to act as one big chunk. So I'll select it all. I'll right click. And then what I can do is I can group this thing. What it's going to do now is act like one big piece whenever I select it. So if I scale it, it all scales together. Hold on the shift button to kind of force my perspective with it. And then whenever I slide it over, if I'm going to make copies, whatever I'm going to do with it, it's going to grab all 5 of those chunks at once instead of having to manually edit all of them. Now, just because this thing is in a group doesn't mean it can't be edited anymore. If I double click on it, it goes into isolation mode. You see everything else just kind of went gray behind it. This is telling me that this is the only active live thing that I can edit right now. So now that I'm in isolation mode, maybe I decided this thing needs to just go a little bit taller on this leaf. So I'm going to click once, click a second time to highlight that point and bring it out a little bit more. So now if I'm happy with it, Looks good. I'm still in isolation mode. To get out of it, I can either arrow back this way, or I can double click with my selection tool. So now it's still one big object, but I can still edit it. If at any point you decide you don't want it to be a group anymore, you can always right click and do that ungroup command. These commands are also available under the object menu. So if you're going to go to object, group, or ungroup, you can handle it that way. So that's taking those pieces, kind of playing around with them, working with that. What I want to do though is I want to start taking a look at how I can take all this art and actually put it together and bring it over here. Now, I've got some stuff over here that I don't want to bump. So as you're moving things, you might see like things overlap and then it kind of gets complicated. You click away, you're trying to grab things. What you can do is you can actually lock your artwork. So like this, protect our wildlife. I don't want to touch it. I'm happy with where it is. It's not going to move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that. I'm going to go to object and I'm just going to lock that selection. So now it doesn't even act like it's there. I can't select it at all. Same thing with these kind of bamboo pieces in the background. I'm not going to have any need for those things. So what I can do is I'm happy with how they are. I can lock that selection. I could also unlock it and I can also hide it. So maybe I wanted to just hide that stuff. It's still there. It's just that it's hidden. I'm not going to bump into it. I'm not going to accidentally set something on top of it or click multiple pieces. But again, I can show all. But I think what I'll do for these is I'm just going to lock that selection just so that all I'm working with is my panda and then my other shapes here. So now that we got this, I'm going to bring this over here. But you know what? I think I'm actually going to put this piece together. We're going to build our own kind of big bamboo piece, like a big definitive one here, and we're going to attach that chunk to it. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to take these pieces. They're all pre-built for us. They're just basic shapes that they have a gradient put on here. So it's just a fade from a light green to a dark green. And what we're going to do with this is they're not organized. We have a way of snapping all these things together. So instead of having to take these and one at a time, very carefully snapping them and lining them up, making sure they intersect, that they're exact, rather than doing that one at a time, let's automate this. We can do this a little faster. I'm going to grab the whole thing. So I'm going to grab my selection tool and just click and drag to select them all. We're going to take a look at something called the aligning. So if you go to window and down to align, you might also notice that this is your align box on the right hand side. So maybe you wanted to see them this way, but either way, that's how I got to it. Now what I can do is I can align my objects. So here, if I want to horizontally align them along the center, I can click on that and it snaps them all together. Perfect. Now what I want to do is I want to make these things space evenly. And right now they're just aligning to a selection. What I want to do is I want to align them to a key object. So what I could do is I could just grab this and now it's all going to snap to this. And see how there's like these weird gaps between all of it? I want to get rid of all these spaces. I want them to kind of stack together in one big piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a vertical distribution, but I'm going to give it no spacing. So if I click this, it snaps them all right together. Maybe you wanted like a little gap between them. You could. So now instead of having to manually do all that, it'll just put it all together. So now that I have this, what I'm going to do is grab it all. I'm going to group it because again, I want all these objects to kind of act the same. And now that I have this thing as a group, I can bring it over into this document. And I want this thing to be bigger. It's going to be a little bit kind of more definitive. So I'm going to grab it and I'm going to scale this thing up. I'm going to make sure I hold my shift key so it doesn't look goofy. I'm going to snap kind of from edge to edge. Here I've got this piece. I can bring it over here and kind of stack it in. Maybe I want to make like a duplicate of this. If you want to copy anything, all you'll need to do is right click. Oh, excuse me. If you want to copy anything when you have it selected, it's just edit copy, edit paste, or Command C, Command V. And what I want to do is I want to flip this. I'm going to click on this object and instead of shrinking it, I'm actually going to flip it right through itself. So maybe I'll grab a little piece and stick it down here. And then the other thing that doesn't look quite right to me is the way it's kind of arranged. I want bamboo shoot to be in the front. So I'm going to select the object in its group. So it's going to act like one big piece. I'll right click on it. I'm going to do my arrange and bring this thing to the front. So now there is some art that goes off the edge of the artboard, but you don't need to worry about that because if it saves out as a PDF, it's going to be fine because it'll trim right to that edge anyway. So if you have any art overlapping, you're always going to be fine. Now for the last piece we're going to take a look at is this object here. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that this thing kind of aligns evenly. I want to make this kind of the base or the body of the panda. So I'm going to go back up to my direct selection tool, and you'll see I got my 3 anchor points, basically a fancy triangle that's just got a big curved out edge to it, right? Now, if I click on this bottom anchor point, I know this is selected because I'm seeing this is darkened in and the other points are hollow. So I'm going to click on this thing and drag it down. And you see how it says intersect? It's going to intersect to other points. I want it to be a perfectly horizontal line to that other point, just like that. Now when I let go, got a nice even shape. I can come back up to my regular selection tool, grab it, drop it into place, and then kind of play around with my height, see kind of how hunched or not I want them to look. Go down just a little bit. And again, I have a little bit hanging off the bottom of the edge. That's totally fine. And now because of my stacking order, because this is in the front, the body of the panda sits in the back, and it kind of gives me a little perspective here of how like this is in front, kind of giving me a little layering or a little depth. So now that everything looks good, I'm going to double click the hand to zoom out and kind of fill the screen with all the art. And that's exactly what we're looking for. So now that I've got all these grouped objects, everything's set together, I'm all set. I'm going to stop and do a save as command. And again, you're going to save it as last name and description as a PDF file. Again, I like to save mine onto my desktop. All the defaults are fine. I always like to make sure I have preserved Illustrator editing capability, defaults to it. And then when you're done with this, you're going to send this over to me as an email. So that's lessons 1 and lessons 2. And then the last thing we're going to take a look at is a little extension project that's going to give you guys a chance to try this on your own. So if I jump back into Blackboard, this is the other piece here, this logo extension. So again, what you're going to do is you're going to open up this PDF. This is the Bucks logo. And what I did was I pulled it all apart, scaled it, sized it, kind of played around positioning, and I'm going to have you rebuild it and kind of organize it back. So if you click on the file, opens up my file in my downloads folder. I'm going to drag up that zip file and double click it to extract it. And here it is. It's just this AI file. Double click on this thing to open it. And what you're going to see is basically just a whole bunch of objects, just like we kind of did in that lesson. Only this time what we're going to do is we're going to take them and we're going to rebuild them ourselves. So close all these because I'm not going to need too much. Nothing has been messed with in any kind of real weird way. These are mostly just the pieces of the object with all different arrangements and sizing and scaling. So what you're going to do is you're just going to grab them. And what I like to do is kind of stack them here, or if you want to do it this way, where you use that as a reference, what I like to do is kind of like this. I'll grab it, I'll play around with my positioning. And what I'm going to do is I always like to make sure I'm holding my shift button. And it looks like this one's going to shift in pretty close. If it's not exact, that's okay, but you want to get as close as possible. So now I know the size looks good. Right over here, but what's my problem? My arrangement, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to arrange. I'll bring this to the front, snap this in here. And that's what you're going to do, one piece at a time. Notice some of them are rotated, some of them are shrunk. You've got all these different pieces, and they're all set up in groups. So all you're going to do is figure out what the piece is, bring it over here as a reference point. I'm going to shift click, and then I can bring it over onto this piece. And I'm going to take this and just kind of one object at a time, bring them over. I'm still a little big. And again, I'm holding my shift key to make sure everything is kind of exact as far as sizing. I think that looks pretty good. And then obviously I got to arrange this thing. I'm going to bring it to the front, or I could bring it forward or backward one step at a time with that command bracket until it's right where it needs to be. Kind of snap it into place. This will probably need to come up a little bit. So again, as you're going through, grab your objects, figure out what they are. If they need to be rotated, you could rotate this way. So here, like on this piece, looks like I need to rotate it. Scale it up, and it makes sure you're holding your shift key the whole time. That's going to save you a lot of headache, because if you don't hold the shift key, it'll rotate disproportionately, and then you're going to end up with a weird shaped object. And I can bring it over here, arrange it, bring it to front. So when you're done with yours, what you're going to do is get it all organized, put together. And then when you're done, you can save this as a PDF, just like you have with everything else, and you'll email that to me as well. What most people like to do is rather than send over a bunch of emails one at a time, what they'll do is they'll just do all the lesson pieces, save all the PDFs, and then send me an email with all three, in this case, all three files as one document. And here I've got them all saved. So I've got my lesson 1, my lesson 2, and my extension project, and you can just send that all over to me as PDFs when you're done. So that's it for lessons 1 and 2. It's just really a way of kind of getting you more comfortable with working in Illustrator, with how the interface is set up, some of those selection objects, that type of thing. Next session, we're going to take a look at using shapes to create artwork for a postcard. So it's really more about customizing, building some additional objects, that type of thing. So I'll see you at the next session. Thank you.